2, 1.
Mm-hmm. Hello, everybody.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Inside Movies Galore. I am your host, David Streggy, and here we are continuing our Days of Future Past month, where we are going to go on and talk about the sequel to Escape from New York that was filmed 15 years later in 1996 by director John Carpenter. And let me just go ahead and state what IMDb... Correct. Let me just go ahead and state what IMDb says about the film before we go into our first impressions. Snake Plissken is once again called in by the United States governor to recover a potential doomsday device from Los Angeles, now an autonomous island where undesirables are deported. So, going around the room, shall I say clockwise? I'll go with you, Jake, first and foremost.
Okay. Well, this was definitely a first-time watch, and it definitely did not impress as much as the other one did. In some ways, it was quite an interesting one. But oh my God, the CG was bad.
Yeah.
Oh my God, the CG was bad. I was not expecting it to be so bad.
Well, it was pretty. It was pretty damn good for the time, but now it ages about as well. It looks like an asylum movie now, so it has not aged well.
I think this was the same year as Mortal Kombat Annihilation, and I want to say the CG was better.
That was 1 year later. It was nowhere near that bad. Come on.
Yeah. I think this was as bad. At least as bad. It was, and I kind of agree with Mo. I'm not going to go on as bad of a tear about the music, but I will agree it was lesser than the first go round. But it was still good. I mean, it was still good. Overall, I had the same issue. I actually had to go back and specifically seek out the Bruce Campbell scene because I slept through it the first time, and I wanted to make sure I'd at least seen it.
Oh, come on.
But overall, it was a pretty fun movie.
This movie has serious pacing issues, but it wasn't quite that bad.
Well, as I said before, I've been very narcoleptic this week, so I'm not blaming the movie entirely for that.
Alrighty, Dustin, is this your first time watch for this film?
No, I've seen this a couple of times. This is a really odd movie because it has all the ingredients to be like an amazing action movie. And for whatever reason, it just doesn't. It never quite fully fires on all cylinders. Like something about it just doesn't mesh together right. It's like all the ingredients are there, but it doesn't bake together.
That's what I thought about Watchmen.
About what?
That's what I thought about Watchmen. It had all the right ingredients, and it just didn't work.
Well, if you're thinking about the movie, I mean,
yeah.
That aside, I did like it. It's not as good as Escape from New York, but what really could be.
Yeah.
So I first saw this at some point last year. When I found the Blu-ray like in not like a dollar bin, but somewhere on markdown. And then I found the Shout Factory Blu-ray a short while ago, which does not have as many extras as I was expecting it to. Like I thought it would at least have a commentary, but it did not.
That one's price keeps pretty high, which I'm surprised.
Escape from LA?
The Shout Factory version
of Escape from LA?
Yeah.
Wow.
I really see Shout Factory take it lower than 20. even on their sales, they usually don't sell for less than 17. So unless you find it in the wild for cheap, maybe, but not at least not.
So I know there's a whole thing of Shout Factory titles starting to be even more collectible now, and I'm in a collector group that's just for Shout Factory titles. And I think Escape from New York is out of print and going up in value, but I think Escape from LA is still in print, so it shouldn't be too hard to find.
Yeah,
it's funny because I got it for like $2.50.
Oh wow!
Yeah, you lucked out.
Well, I'm gonna pick up the Scream Factory before too long because I watched it on Amazon Prime because I didn't think it would necessarily get there on time, and I was gonna get it from this one eBay seller that I know for a fact has it with the slipcover and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Dane, why don't you tell us? Was this a first-time watch for you?
Yes, it was. I finished it up right before we started the previous episode, and it's interesting because like it feels like the first movie crossed with the scope and the tone of Batman Forever, which came out the previous year. It feels like that right up until the end, which the end then feels like it took a hard right into something like Watchmen or like something that Alan Moore would have written, which is interesting because I felt like the ending was actually much stronger than the first film. But it's one of those things where I'm really trying to wrestle with it in my head because I'm like, is this more intelligent than I'm giving it credit for, or is it stupider than I'm giving it credit for? Because I could see it either way, because it's like, on the one hand, it did, predict a lot of things about 2013, in terms of like how we're very technology obsessed, and so if we got rid of that, then it would be damaging. But it also, it's like everything has to be bigger, better, more extreme, and everything. Which that was a problem in the '90s also. But like, it was the idea of I don't know. I was like, is this more prophetic than I'm making it out to be, or is it more of an unfortunate product of the '90s having to have everything be extreme, And I think you could probably look at it either way, but my initial instinct is that it did suffer from some of the '90s syndrome, which I don't necessarily mind '90s syndrome as much as some people might, just because I am kind of a child of the '90s. But at the same time, I'm like, there is such a thing as getting so big and so ridiculous that, you start to lose touch. And, so it felt like it was teetering more on that line. Plus just the fact that it hits pretty much the same beats as the first one at pretty much the same times. But it just so happens to have like just enough about him to make it different. But I mean, on the whole, I enjoyed it. It got like there was the good moments in this film. I think it hits higher highs than the first one, but the lows are so much lower, and there are more of them. And again, I'm like, you could easily read this as a wicked satire of the '90s, or you could read it as the most unfortunate product of the '90s. Either way, and I'm still kind of undecided. I'm kind of leaning more towards the latter, but I could see arguments for the former. And actually, John Carpenter himself says that this is a better film than the first one. So, and we'll get into some of those. We'll get into some of those other perspectives as we go, but I'm just throwing that out there right now.
As far as anything goes, this is the film that I know the most, and this is not a first time watch for me. This is actually the film that I have actually seen the most out of the two films, and I actually have no problem with any of the CGI, though I know it is dated. I get a kick out of it, seeing how mad whack this goes. And the fact that we've got Pipeline being played by Peter Fonda of all characters. He is like the best dude bro surfer I have ever encountered in any movie, because he's like, yo, Snake, let's do this shit, So to me, you got him, you got Steve Buscemi, who kind of plays like your brain-like character, except I think he plays him better.
Steve Buscemi is an absolute treasure in any movie that he's in. It doesn't matter. Like, I mean, he was the best part of Armageddon, and that movie was star-studded as all hell, with some really great actors in it, some of whom had cut their teeth in the indie world. But again, it's like that Con Air, Barton Fink, doesn't matter if it's mainstream, art house, whatever. He will just make a movie a treasure no matter what.
Or as we will examine next month.
I also feel like Kurt Russell, because 15 years have passed, his voice is deeper.
Mm-hmm.
I have the extreme opposite thoughts on the music, where I feel like the music is actually accentuated and even better than the original synth score. And
I agree. I think the music is better in this film. Not to mention that the artist that they got to be on the soundtrack was like, you had the
White Zombie,
the White Zombie song. Like, those are all the bands that are on there. Is like, those are bands that I still love to this day, and it's like the song that plays in the end credits is fucking great.
And though
that was the soundtrack to my childhood right there.
Yeah, exactly.
Did we get Brandon's first impressions yet? Because I think we're gonna go.
We're still working on Dave, aren't we?
Yeah, I thought we were working on Dave's first impression.
We're still on Dave? Oh, sorry, Dave.
But ultimately, I feel like this is a truly better action film than I think that New York was.
It's more of a spectacle,
mainly because it's more nostalgic and more effective to me. Even though I know you definitely couldn't probably take a surfing dive to the back of a car in this day and age.
I mean, you're right in the sense that it is much more of an overt spectacle than the first one was.
Yeah. Let's go over to Brandon and get your first perspective. Was this the first time watch for you?
It was not. I did not watch this as a child, but I caught this a ways after. It was just after college. I remember seeing, because I was really into Bruce Campbell stuff, and I had heard that he was in that, which had me track down a DVD copy of it originally. I did upgrade to the Blu-ray later. And I loved most of this film. I always considered Escape from New York to be almost a parody of action films of the day, whereas I consider this one a far more purposeful parody than previously. It made fun of itself.
Even more. That's what I was gonna say.
Well,
it's like self-parody,
and that to me made this such a fun film. I enjoyed this one. I actually think I enjoyed it more than the original. I mean, I think the original was better put together, but this one, as far as pure viewing entertainment wise, I like this one better that way. I mean, looking at things, I'm used to seeing these dystopian futures, and man, did they double down on this one. And I will talk more on how they doubled down as we move into the setting and all that. But I liked it. I enjoy watching it each time that I've seen it. And this time it was no different. I mean, how many other movies do you have where you've got a surf action sequence mixed with a car chase?
Yeah,
I mean,
plus explosive hang gliders on their big climax there.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and I mean, you gotta take a little bit of credit with Kurt Russell landing that motorcycle on the back of that one vehicle. So, but going over to Forrest, what were your first impressions of this film? Is this the first time watch for you?
Oh no way! I remember. Actually, I think I remember seeing trailers for this like in theaters when as a kid. I didn't see it when it first came out, but I remember seeing trailers for it. The summer it came out, and I'm like, oh man, this looks pretty intense. This looks pretty. I was like, 8-year-old me was like, man, this looks pretty fucking intense. But eventually I did catch. But I caught it on I actually caught like the network television premiere several years later on like it had network television premiere on ABC, where a lot of the violence and language is toned down. But eventually I did catch it like later on, like it's in uncut glory, not too long after. I had already seen it. I had already seen Escape from New York, but at this point, and I could tell right away that this was pretty much like in many ways a rehash of the original. But like I kind of feel about it. I kind of feel like I feel like to me it's a rehash in the way that the way that I feel about like Home Alone 2 or Ghostbusters 2, where it's a rehash. It's not as good as the original, but I would be lying if I didn't say I fucking enjoyed it. I fucking enjoy it. I love them. It's definitely. I definitely agree with Dane. It's definitely very much a product of the '90s.
Oh yeah, it's '90s extreme to the max.
Plus, like Demolition Man, which came out a few years before. It seems like it's definitely like pushing back against a lot of the political correctness of the time, or like it seems to be like satirizing the political correctness of the time,
while at the same time embracing certain aspects of the 90s that were most definitely not politically correct by today's standards, specifically when it comes to trans people, which we'll get to. But again, that was talk about 90s, like homophobia / transphobia was most definitely a 90s thing. Yeah, it's weird because like LGBTQ people were getting more visible in the 90s, and yet all the attention they were getting was all bad. It was like, well, thanks.
It's like the 90s was like the death. It was like the death of Reagan's America. Yet in some ways it was maybe a little. It wasn't any more progressive anymore.
There was a certain vigilance from certain new factions of the moral majority and stuff, the kind of which that would produce a president like the kind we get in here, who's basically like if Pat Robertson's attempts at the presidency actually came to fruition.
Right. I guess I said I love the soundtrack of this movie. I definitely disagree with Mo about the soundtrack. I mean, I tend to listen to the New York score more, but I kind of like how this one kind of beefed up a lot of the tracks from the original. So to speak, and I also the soundtrack. I guess this is the kind of music I was listening to whereas a lot of my classmates were listening to like Hanson and Spice Girls. A lot of the bands a lot of the bands that were contributing to this movie were like the ones that I grew up with, like Tool, White Zombie, Butthole Surfers, Ministry.
Yeah, those are all the bands I still listen to today.
Same here.
Yeah, I thought Butthole Surfers was just like a throwaway joke from a Simpsons skit.
Oh no!
I did not know they were a real band until I saw them on the soundtrack for this movie.
Yeah, they were on a bunch. They were on a bunch of iconic '90s soundtracks.
Oh yeah.
Like my dad had a VHS tape of their videos.
Well, they were on this soundtrack. They were on the 1996 Romeo and Juliet soundtrack. They were on the Spawn soundtrack. Tons of iconic 90s soundtracks. I think they did Beavis and Butthead too. That too.
Yep. And the cast, is just, it's phenomenal. There's that, besides Russell, you got, Buscemi, Fonda, Robertson, Pam Grier. I think Joe Bob Briggs even has a part in this too.
Extra special shout out to the underutilized and always underrated Valeria Gallino.
Yes.
You may remember from Rain Man.
I remember mainly from the Hot Shots movies, but yes, Rain Man as well.
And from that brief role in Leaving Las Vegas, where she was at the bar with Nicolas Cage.
So let's get into the plot here. So we have a different president, and this is evidently 2 years later from the last film in 2000. Evidently, an earthquake hit, and evidently the San Fernando Valley flooded, which made the
LA into an island.
Correct, from about Malibu to
Orange County.
Correct.
Actually, the northern border of Orange County.
Big island.
Anaheim. But we have Robertson playing the president, which this is before his great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah,
Exactly.
To be honest, I actually think I saw Spider-Man before I saw this. So it was a little jarring to see Uncle Ben as this megalomaniacal Bible thumper.
Yeah, which interesting little historical context here. So it's still because California. I used to live in Monterey, and we got earthquakes fairly regularly of varying sizes. There is still on the horizon the possibility of quote unquote the big one. And because Robin Williams made that joke in his very last stand-up, he was like, well, when will the big one be? Well, it could be tomorrow or 10,000 years from now. Well, thanks for the fucking heads up. So bottom line is this could still happen, the earthquake part. And obviously 96, this same decade as Batman No Man's Land, where Gotham gets wrecked by an earthquake. So again, that was part of the other 90s extreme ethos that we got going on.
Also disaster movies like Volcano and Twister.
That's right.
Yeah.
But again, I was looking at this movie and I was like, they definitely got certain things about 2013 right, more so than they realized. The one that they didn't quite get right, or at least not yet, is the fact that LA, well, 2013, but even more so lately, has been struggling really bad with wildfires more than earthquakes. But the point being that the big one could still happen.
Yes.
I thought this was set in 2012.
No, 2013.
2013.
2013.
Oh, well.
So yeah, it has been more than just but for the changes that occurred, it makes sense that it's set that much farther than 97. I mean, to be set 16 years later.
Yeah.
Well, they had to change the state. They had to change the nation's capital. This is Lynchburg, Virginia. They had to have president for life. They had to make it a theocracy. That takes a while.
And Lynchburg itself is definitely a big point because Lynchburg,
Liberty University,
for us Virginians, that's where Liberty is. That's where Jerry Falwell was.
That's right.
But I wanted to make a point about this setting. I just wanted to make a point about the setting here, because it's weird how a lot of these dystopian futures tend to go one of a couple of ways. If there's still civilization, either it could be trashed like Mad Max, but usually it's either you've got this kind of religious, highly religious right-wing theocracy, which I'll admit that came about because of the 80s, because of Reagan and Falwell and all of this coming in there because of the moral majority.
And the 1994 Republican Revolution with the election of Newt Gingrich and his ilk.
Yeah, so that was a really prevalent thing on people's minds. But also you have the other, which is the dystopian, which is more prevalently the cyberpunky type thing, where you've got more of a free market hold on everything, not really so much of a government as just private business owning America. And that's so it's kind of cool to see how they've got this and showing these things. There was another film that I've watched called Rising Storm that's similar in these methods.
Yeah. Well, I do think the theocratic aspect of it, like back in 96 with the advent and continued influence of Pat Robertson and James Dobson and people like that, kind of as the carryovers of what Reagan started, I think that there was very much a feeling that, if things continued on that trend, that 2013 or the future, quote unquote, through a dystopian lens would end up like that. And, what we have found is that, it has been less, at least currently, it was a little, 2013 is when this stuff's kind of started, but the tensions that we've been facing lately have been more, like racial / identity related, which isn't, rather than theocratic related, which is why it's interesting that in the background of all of this, it's a little bit de-emphasized relative to what it could have been or was in the real world, which is the fact that what do you have south of the border is all these South American countries posing a threat and being seen as a threat. And, it's like, oh, why not go to Mexico? Well, that it's a war zone out there. And it's like, well, gee, what were the big talking points from like 2013 onward? It was all race and identity stuff, but especially, with, coming from Mexico and South American countries. So they got that part smack on. It was just interesting the emphasis that they place relative to what it would later become.
Well, anyways, back to the film. The president has declared some new moral America laws, which he is about to create, which bans such things as tobacco, alcoholic beverages, recreational drugs, red meat, firearms, profanity, atheism, non-Christian religions, and extramarital sex. And anyone who does not comply to these laws will be sent to this island and stripped of their citizenship and all that jazz. But also his daughter has flown the coop with some kind of box that evidently the president is after, and apparently it's got some nuke codes or whatnot that are related to the satellites that are pointed at the world at this point in time, and that is where Snake comes and is involved, and he becomes another prisoner of war for the sake of the government and the humanity to go in and save mankind. So
Now, for additional historical context here, we have our plot, or our MacGuffin of the story, which is basically satellite EMF weapons, which is the exact same MacGuffin as the GoldenEye weapon in GoldenEye the previous year, except in keeping with our 90s extreme ethos, it's basically GoldenEye but with more stank on it, which I find amusing.
So ultimately, Snake, he's brought in once again. This time, it is not. Let's see if I remember correctly. Who is that military commander that brings him in at this time?
Commander Mac Malloy, played by Stacy Keach.
Okay, yeah. So Stacy Keach comes in and brings him along tow with the president, and they basically inject him. Actually, no, he gets scratched by a female prison guard passing through, unbeknownst to him, and apparently he's been given a virus. But he's also given another time frame where he's actually got to come back in time, and the president doesn't care whether his daughter comes back alive or dead. So
more specifically, he is injected with a quote unquote designer virus, which was specifically designed to do such and such thing, which, spoiler alert, we find out is an advanced form of the flu, which our dear coronavirus conspiracy theorists like to say that the coronavirus was a manufactured virus. And the coronavirus does, in fact, resemble a more severe form of the flu. But it's like, oh, gee whiz, they inadvertently predicted something else that would get thrown around in much the same way that the first one had a plane flying near the Twin Towers, but not quite into the Twin Towers. So kind of eerie coincidences.
Well, and the fact that in the end of this film, we have the bat-like gliders. So, but in any case, let us go a little bit more into the plot a little bit more. We have Snake ending up going in this cool ass looking underwater
sub.
What is it? Sub?
The submarine.
Well, before we do that, we got to change a costume. We get into some very 90s extreme
trench
leather
coat
with the black leather.
I had that black leather
trench coat.
Which I have to say, I am a sucker for that look. So no complaints from me whatsoever. But it is very of its time.
90s.
In much
Supposed
the
to be
same
not
way that
trackable.
in much the same way that the first outfit was of its time.
Yep.
I believe Keanu Reeves had a similar
Brandon Lee the Crow.
But I just have to point out there are several things about this film that I think are better than the first film, one of which is the outfit, which I thought was a million times better than the first outfit, which is not to say the first outfit was bad, but it's just come on, you can't beat black leather with a black leather trench coat. You just can't.
And even more like a cowboy scene because he's got the holsters.
Oh, totally.
Oh, yeah, the holsters.
Totally.
But yeah, when he goes...
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I was just moving along the story anyway.
Anyways, he gets his sub up onto whatever land that is available for him, and he is met by our pipeline dude who is carrying a gun at the time, and he's like, "Yo, dude, stay out of our area," and then he's like, "I'm just passing through."
Actually, what year was this movie?
96. Well, yeah, 96.
Because there's definite parallels between this and Metal Gear Solid, which Solid Snake also enters in on the sub. So I was wondering which one kind of fed off the other.
Well, this came first. This came first.
I'm guessing that probably inspired it.
Well, okay. So the first Escape from New York came before all of the Metal Gear games. Then Metal Gear, then Escape from LA, and then finally Metal Gear Solid. So that's kind of the chronology there.
Because Snake did use a portable sub like that in Metal Gear Solid. So I was thinking to myself, maybe that was another, because Snake himself was, Kojima has actually stated that this movie did inspire that. So that's kind of cool to see.
Both characters are called Snake, so it's not exactly subtle.
No, they didn't make it very subtle.
But in any case, he ends up going a little further. Pipeline starts to recognize him, and they have a kind of interesting relationship throughout the film. And ultimately, he ends up running into Steve Buscemi's character, which he's like this sly, sleazy
tour guide.
Map making tour guide who
Map
just
to
wants
the stars.
And he rides around in this red ass car,
convertible.
Correct. And he ends up telling them to go an entirely different way than probably he should, because he's not exactly on his side, as we find out down the road. But ultimately, he ends up running into this young lady who's hiding in some bushes, and there's this underground sewer cult, I guess.
Yeah. Always the sewer cults.
Yeah. Well, and that's our dear Valeria Gallino, by the way.
Which ultimately,
I have to say, as a female lead in this film, I think that she kind of blew Adriana Barbeau out of the water in terms of she had a lot more to her character. Adriana Barbeau was just there to be boobalicious, and that was it. This character I felt like had a lot more to her, and I felt kind of sad when she died because I felt like she had a really interesting backstory, and I think she had a good argument for her side. But I will say that when she does die unexpectedly, it is very unexpected. And you're like, oh shit, Yeah,
and that's kind of yeah, and on top of that, her character's, she mentions her being Muslim. It's like this is 5 years before Islamophobia really became an issue in this country.
Oh, big time. Well, and I mean, imagine the Islamophobia that would come about from to September 11th onward. Yeah. And especially if you, because there's like a small minority of Muslims that are not ethnically Middle Eastern, but But they do exist, and it's like, well, there you go. You're being alienated even more, you know.
Well, ultimately, the underground sewer cult ends up bringing both of them to an underground lair of a repo genetic culture, where the lead character, the Surgeon General,
of Beverly
is
Hills.
Surgeon
played
General
by
is weird.
none other than Bruce Campbell with the
Yeah.
Pinocchio nose.
What did we think of that scene? Because that scene, to me, it was sort of, I was of two minds about it. That was the scene where I was sort of clued into, like, okay, this is either really smart or really stupid.
When did
And
Roxanne come out?
that was,
Very-
87.
yeah.
Okay, so
Okay, so I almost think that Roxanne got, Steve Martin got his nose from watching or from
Bruce
them
Campbell.
watching Bruce Campbell here.
I was
It's-
saddened because it was not enough Bruce Campbell. It was
Yeah.
very brief.
yeah,
I wanted more Bruce Campbell, but I will say that I liked the fact that, because Bruce Campbell kind of looks like a cartoon character anyway.
Yeah.
Like, he really-
I
he
mean,
really-
he's
He
got a
almost,
memoir
he almost
called-
takes you out of it when he's in stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
well,
I mean,
but that's what's so interesting though, because his normal face is so, like, it looks like a caricature of like the standard macho man, because he's got the chin and the everything.
I
but,
mean,
like,
his memoir is called "If Chins Could Kill."
Exactly, but like here,
I have that somewhere.
here they took all that away from him, and he looks really freakish looking, and that's obviously intentional because it's meant to poke fun at the LA plastic surgery culture and stuff.
I wonder if this character ultimately inspired the director of Repo the Genetic Opera.
Well, no, Repo Man came first, before this film.
No, Repo the
No,
Genetic
Repo the-
Opera, not
yeah.
different one.
I know
You're
that,
thinking-
but Repo the Genetic Opera was inspired by Repo Man, wasn't it? Or am I getting those mixed up?
No,
You're
Repo
probably-
Man.
Probably
Repo Man
getting those
was
mixed
entirely
up.
different.
Okay, well, but anyway, point
Repo
being
Man
that,
is its own weird,
Yeah,
inscrutable
Yeah.
thing.
which also had Harry Dean Stanton.
And
Well,
we also have an episode on that one. So if you want to, you should type it in and type in Inside Movies Galore Repo, and you'll be able to hear it. Discussion.
well, my point in saying all that is that you have this actress who is kind of cartoony looking anyway, and then they took away a lot of his normal distinguishing features and made him very freakish looking, which I thought, to make their point, was very effective. But then I also kind of wondered, like, to what degree is this being satire versus self-parody versus, being kind of too cartoony for its own good? Like, I was sort of undecided. And like, that was really the point where I was like, okay, is this going in a good direction, or is it being too ridiculous? I wasn't really sure. I wanted to know what other people thought.
There was
I think
Oh, go
that
ahead.
scene added. I think that scene added a good level of creepiness to
It did.
the movie. Like it was kind of a good horror moment.
Yeah, it did.
But it did kind of run the danger of being like too weird.
Well, and just too kind of like too on the nose of like being, like it goes beyond satire. It goes into parody, and the movie itself, and in a lot of places, teeters on the line of full blown parody of itself. Which again I found kind of odd, but again, that's where I'm really conflicted, because I'm like, on the one hand, you could argue that this is the ultimate satire of franchise movies of the period that did get into self-parody by the end, such as Batman Forever, Batman and Robin, some of the later era Pierce Brosnan, James Bond films, which kept having to be more and more extreme, that kind of stuff.
I was gonna say, in some ways, it's kind of an anti-sequel like Gremlins 2 was.
Yeah. So I mean, I could definitely see that point if that's what they were trying to go for. I just wasn't sure if that indeed was their point, or if it fell victim to some of those worst trends, or if it was making fun of them. I couldn't really tell. And it might be something that has to come from multiple viewings.
Right.
Because now it does seem like they are trying to be more deliberately like attacking of certain LA cultural aspects in a way that they were not with, like, say, New York. Like Escape from New York was more of like a mythic journey, and not really necessarily attacking New York culture per se. But this feels like much more of an LA in joke kind of movie.
Yeah.
There was
And go ahead.
There was an Alice in Wonderland parody, and I not parody necessarily, but it was a kind of a darker version, and I can't think of the name of it. I wanted to say Alice in Murderland, but that is a different movie.
Or what was it? Are you talking, was it a computer game?
No, it was basically, it was almost like Alice in a Big City, essentially, and it was a very well done. It did remind me a lot of this. There is that sort of Wonderland type feel where you're introduced to the strangeness of this setting as you go through on this mission with Snake. So kind of like Snake's own journey into Wonderland.
Yeah, which, I mean, let's not forget the line from Annie Hall. You actually like living out here? It's like living in Munchkin Land.
Yeah, true enough.
Mm-hmm.
Where in the plot are we now? Oh, we're still with the Surgeon General.
Yeah.
So shortly after the Surgeon General, he
comes out and evaluates them, and Snake uses the blow dart to escape.
And ultimately, he holds Bruce's the Surgeon General captive, and they end up escaping them and shoot at them as they end up going into the sewers a little bit further, which they end up. I think they end up. They
end up in like a junkyard.
Yeah.
And she gives some exposition about what it's like living here in LA, and she's like, "It's not so bad once you get used to it." And then she's immediately shot and killed.
Yeah.
That almost seems like kind of sudden, like almost like that was like a decision made on the spot, you know?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I think it actually was. Well, it was a couple of things.
Deliberate.
It was very
deliberate because the idea is now it's going to be a buddy movie with her and him.
Yeah,
going all over the place, and then they just like kill her dead.
Well, it's a couple of things. It's a couple of things because like you never ever got any sexual tension between Kim and Adriana Barbeau in the first one. Not that there really would have been room in the plot for it anyway.
She was brain anyway.
Well, but here they definitely hint at it, but he obviously quite literally has no time for it, and neither does the audience. But like, the fact of the matter is that she makes a good case for the idea of they're social rejects. They have no ties to this totalitarian society. And it's more so, it's kind of the idea of better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven kind of thing. Yeah, that it's more of this ultimate freedom, being an outcast and everything. She makes a good argument, and is even more of an outcast for being a Muslim and everything. And then kind of cruel twist of fate, she's taken out immediately upon making that declaration of freedom. So on the one hand, it's kind of somewhat of a cosmic joke, because on the one hand I was thinking wah wah wah, but on the other, but that's what I was thinking on the one hand. Then on the other hand, I was like, well, that's the ultimate cruel irony right there, because you are free in this world, but in that freedom also comes the high likelihood that you will get killed easily. And so it's, I think that had a very good kind of ironic, good sense of irony, good sense of like kind of poeticness to it in a way.
Well, I knew what he was going for. I just didn't like it.
And ultimately, one of the other political factors that we have not as yet mentioned is Cuervo Jones, who is evidently like this terrorist leader of the people here on the prison island, and he evidently Utopia, who it just so happens to be the president's daughter, has shacked up with him and become his like leading girl or tail, shall we say? And ultimately, she ends up
basically It's basically.
Yeah.
Do what?
Well, I mean, that's
I
the
was-
thing is, yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I guess we had a delay there. It's basically Che Guevara crossed with Patty Hearst. You know, that's basically what they're
yeah.
going for.
Yep.
They even had him dressed like Che Guevara.
Che Guevara, yep.
Yeah, they totally did.
So we were talking about this and the other stuff in the movie as the plot goes. Everything here can be traced back to the original in some shape or form, but is almost either a parody or an actually not necessarily parody, an exaggeration.
Yeah, like a spoof.
Like the president basically saying outright, instead of saying like in the first movie, well, what we really want is the tape. President's kind of irrelevant. Whereas in this one, they just come out and say it. We just want the black box. No, she betrayed the country. Screw her.
Kill her. Yeah.
You know, or Snake's troop was expendable in the first movie, and that was done. But they take it to the extreme, killing off these people as he meets them. In some cases, like her. It's these are all kind of reflections of the previous film in that way.
Big time. Well, and also you have to say that the president here, the first president was more. He felt more like a believable person. Like you could really believe that this guy might be the president. This guy really was like a supervillain, and up to and including, you know, as a lot of religious cultists do, like when someone betrays the faith and they're basically dead to them, and so they have no son, they have no daughter, you know, so they might as well kill them. And you know, it's quite frightening on that level. So it's like, on the one hand, it is kind of 90s extreme, but then on the other hand, it's like, well, on a smaller level, that sort of thing does happen in the real world.
Oh yeah. And ultimately, when we actually, first and foremost, Snake gets a first chance at trying to get to him, but he doesn't exactly get to him per se. I mean, he attempts to, and then of course, he is found out, and he's brought to, I guess, their lair, and he's put into another gladiator-like game, except this time it's with basketball.
Yeah,
in the middle of the LA Coliseum.
Which again, I was sort of like, this is either really smart or really stupid, you know.
It's a game of death.
Yeah. Because again, how 90s could you be but do basketball or hockey?
I want to point out that, like, I'm enjoying the movie. Every time I watch it, I'm enjoying it kind of up to this point. And at this moment, this is when I feel like this is almost over, right? But no, we have like 40 more minutes.
I didn't really get that from it, but I did get the feeling of like, okay, how ridiculous and how 90s is this going to get? You know, I didn't, because I was looking at, I compared the timeline to each of the two films, the running time. I compared them, and they hit about the same beats at about the same times. So structure-wise, it's not really noticeably different from the first one. But what I did notice again was just the fact that the kinds of stuff that's being done is much more indicative of the time in which it was made, and it does get increasingly more ridiculous.
Well, ultimately, Snake does win the game, and he's able to walk out of it entirely. But then I think the earthquakes start to happen a little bit more, and
we have to get totally tubular with it.
Cuervo Jones has to shoot him down anyways, because that's just how things are run around there. He's a Scarface-like character. So,
what were you gonna say, Brandon?
Say hello to my little friend.
Y'all were talking about how many parallels these things had to westerns, yet y'all left out the fact that they had a Western gunfight.
Bangkok.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At the,
He picked up a can and said, "Hey,
Bangkok rules.
Bangkok rules."
Nobody
It-
draws until this cam drops.
He throws the can out.
Yeah.
While their eyes are on the can, bam, bam, bam.
Draw.
Yeah, I
That
like
was-
that.
yeah.
Yep.
That was an interesting moment.
I like that a lot. Like
Yeah,
that.
sorry
That
about
was a
that, go on
very.
back, yeah.
That was a very
Mhm.
good, Clint Eastwood character kind of moment there, and also it felt like something that Snake Plissken would have done because he's not stupid enough to fall for their bullshit.
Mhm.
See, that wherein I get where you're coming from with the Clint Eastwood stuff, but I still feel like Snake Plissken is its own character.
I would argue actually.
Definitely is. He just has kind of a touch of that Western hero in him.
Yeah.
Well, but I would
Mhm.
actually argue in your favor, Dave, that in this film, he seems to be having to rely less on an overt Clint Eastwood impression here. It feels like he's more comfortable in his own skin in
Well,
this one.
Again, also, he is also a producer as well as a writer
That's
in this
right.
film. So he's definitely more involved with the film and probably has a little bit more creative
Yeah.
ness to him, which is why it's great that Forrest mentioned that eventually he does Tombstone, which eventually he takes up the director's helm, uncredited as it were.
Yeah. Well, let's also not forget that this was 15 years later. He'd had quite a few action films under his belt by this point, so he's clearly not only much more comfortable in the skin of Snake Plissken, but also much more comfortable in his own action movie hero skin. So I mean, I brought up the Clint Eastwood comparison more so in the first one because it's looking like in the first one that he's having to use that more as a starting point, and then here you get more of the sense that he's comfortable in this part and that he's more of his own person.
Okay. Moving on. So apparently after the earthquake, ultimately he ends up having another moment to grab the box and disappear into the sewers. But Utopia ends up following him, and so does Steve Buscemi's character. And another earthquake happens, and I guess he ends up being sent down the sewage water while
Steve Buscemi actually manages to wing him with a shot.
Yep.
Which he goes back and says, "Oh, I guess he's dead." And he's like, "Well, you know what? I want you to bring me back his head." And he's like,
Yeah.
"Really? Are you sure?"
Yeah.
So he ends up evidently going after.
So he goes into the canyon. Look, he's kind of on his way to go look for Snake. When the surf sequence happens and Snake
Yeah.
him.
So do we introduce Hershey at the point, because when they went through the sewers and Snake was thought to be dead and all that stuff?
Not quite yet. Like,
ultimately, he runs into Steve Buscemi's character again in his red fucking vehicle, and he's like, "Well, guess what? I know about this lady who also used to work with Cuervo, but they are they are at odds with each other. Why don't I take you there and go meet her? She's a pretty swell gal." And when he gets there and shit, her voice is like so low, and he's like, "I know you, don't I? You're Carjack Malone."
Carjack Malone. Like, my name's not Carjack anymore. It's Hershey, and he's not very respectful of that, which kind of surprised me.
Nope.
Well,
Yeah.
Well, it was their time in the worst ways.
Jake was talking about this in Project Snake, about how the character's chauvinistic, how the kind of insulting. Now, can you see that or understand that more looking at these movies with this character as the inspiration?
Oh yeah.
A little bit.
What's interesting, because I mentioned this in the chat, the consensus was I think that they must have pitch shifted Pam Grier, because I was looking at the syncing of the audio and I was like, the audio syncs too perfectly for it to have been a dub, and the pitch shifting was definitely something that one could do technologically at that time.
I actually did read that John Carpenter had adjusted the volume or the pitch later on.
It sounded like it.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
anyway,
ultimately, he ends up telling her that okay, there's a chopper that's going to be ready and available. Well, after
there's a military chopper coming. We'll be able to get you out of here if you help us escape.
All of us? He's like, sure.
Yeah.
When has it ever been all of us?
Not really a guarantee, but sure. Kind of a thing. So they all end up. Evidently, Shadow is evidently the name of Hershey's counterpart that she evidently works with, and he suggests death from the sky as a way from to go in on the charade when they get there. And Steve Buscemi, I love his character when he first comes into the whole arena, and he's like, "Oh, hey, Cuervo, how you doing?"
It's like Pliskin's alive and he's coming for you. What's that? He tries to pick up the disc on the Doomsday Weapon and gets caught. But Snake does show up like at that moment, and we have our climactic shootout here.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about our Batman Forever kind of scale of the climax there. I mean, we already had some Batman Forever-esque moments with the submarine, with the surfing, with the that kind of stuff, but it gets full-blown Batman Forever.
Batman.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's better than that. Like Snake comes in on a hang glider.
Yeah, well, that's why
I
had to correct myself there, because it feels more like they saw Batman Forever and were like, we have to up the scale of this thing, because the whole climax definitely feels like if it hadn't been like a rated movie, they probably could have had some toys made from it.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, and ultimately the chopper ends up coming down, and of course the two dudes that were inside the chopper, they of course get thrown out of the chopper. When they hang glide down in that middle, Snake's already like, okay, let's all get inside the chopper. It's bulletproof.
Chopper's bulletproof. Run for it. And there's a huge shootout, and they manage to take Cuervo out in the shootout. Steve Buscemi actually gets him, which is kind of a nice win for his character, but he falls out of the chopper as they try to dodge an RPG that Cuervo shoots at it. And so Steve Buscemi is still in LA while everybody else escapes.
Yep.
Yeah, but he gets to stay alive, which is something.
Well, and it's him and Utopia who end up surviving because there was an explosion in the back seat of the helicopter. As you saw the other three end up aflame, and when they get back to the mainland, evidently he's made another switch. So, what do we think about this end piece where he ends up coming back to the president on his own, or at least we think he does?
He switches out. He makes the switch and gives them the fake Doomsday Weapon, and he uses
but he himself is a hologram.
That's right.
Yeah. He uses the real Doomsday Weapon to destroy all technology.
Yeah.
Can you try muting when you cough?
Who? So we back up a little bit, because one of the key aspects to this film that, again, very, very 90s, that actually did come to fruition in the 2010s. The 90s had a massive hard-on for virtual reality. Massive. And it was only in the 2010s that we finally got to have it kind of sort of realized. Not in quite as much of the way as the 90s predicted, and not as consumer friendly, and not as ubiquitous, but it's there. So it definitely predicted that part. The hologram part, we haven't really. I think probably technologically it is technically there. Like I'm thinking of like the Michael Jackson one that performed the Slave to the Rhythm, after he died and that kind of stuff. There's that, but in terms of like mass kind of consumerist level, haven't really gotten there. But yeah, this film is big on the virtual reality part and on the hologram part, which obviously factors into the climax there. But
we definitely haven't gotten to the point of holograms that are as capable of tricking people as this particular.
Not quite yet. Although we do have the because keep in mind that these holograms, that they are not they're not sentient by any means. They're basically like super advanced webcams in terms of their functionality, which we video conference now more than ever. But I think that's kind of interesting. But the whole virtual reality obsession, that was a big deal in the 90s. But yeah, with this climax here, despite how utterly ridiculous certain parts of the movie had been up to this point, and how I compared them to Batman Forever, because again, the 90s were very much extreme, very much your movie climaxes have to be bigger and better and more ridiculous and more extreme, all that stuff. And you saw that in franchises all over the place. But then you get to this ending, which again, you were doing Batman Forever, and then all of a sudden you take a hard right into Alan Moore territory with our protagonist embracing full-blown anarchy, basically, and destroying civilization as we know it to try to give all of humanity a chance to start again. But it's like
pushes the reset button on technology.
Exactly. But I thought that was the ending in the first movie was more of just a fuck you to the president, and just more for like a mild neglect, whereas this was like full blown, hit the reset button on the entire human race kind of thing. And I was like, damn, that you started off making like the ultimate 90s extreme kind of movie, and then you took a hard right into Alan Moore territory, and all the better for it, because that really elevated the rest of the material. And I was like, well, hey, good for you. But it kind of, in a weird way, it kind of felt like that middle portion was almost like studio notes, and then the ending was like the thing that they might have really fought for, which again, I don't know so much about the making of it. I don't know whose ideas were whose and what was motivating them, but the idea in and of itself, I was like, well, that was pretty impressive with just how dark that could be for a mainstream movie that otherwise was very 90s extreme, intended to, I assume, put butts in seats. But like, damn, that was pretty dark stuff, and all the better for it, because hey, he succeeded where Alec Trevelyan failed in Goldeneye.
Alrighty, so ultimately, I think this is where we get into the special effects of the film, correct?
Yes.
Why not?
So, what do we think about the special effects of this film? How about let's start with you, Dustin?
Well, I think the effects in this mostly hold up pretty well, like explosions, gunfire, blood and gore, like it all works fine. The only thing that doesn't really hold up is the CGI that they use on the helicopter at the end, which looks pretty phony.
Well, I would expand it. I think which again, the CGI was very much in its infancy at the time. Very few movies knew how to do it somewhat decently. So I don't want to be too harsh on it, but I will say that they, as with other movies of its era, most of those effects tend not to age very well. I'm thinking of like the very opening earthquake scene, the falling glass effects are very obviously computer generated, plus like the submarine, plus the some of the helicopter stuff, like some of that stuff, it looks like what you would see in an asylum film today, plus like some of the CGI green screen compositing was not up to our standards today. But again, I never want to be too harsh on effects, because I tried to compare them to what was available at the time. Compared to what was available at the time, I think that the compositing efforts were pretty, they did some pretty interesting things, but they didn't age as well as, say, like if you look 2 years later at like Armageddon, the compositing work in that film actually holds up surprisingly well. But again, that was such a new territory that I'm not really surprised that certain things kind of fall by the wayside.
All righty. What about you, Forrest? What do you think of the special stuff going on here?
Special effects. Okay, so I agree. A lot of the practical effects look still hold up very well. Like like Bruce Lee and all his patients and nurses' face cartoonish facelifts. Those I think they. I'm sorry.
Bruce
Campbell.
Bruce Campbell.
Oh yeah, Bruce Campbell. I'm sorry, Bruce Campbell. Bruce Campbell's face, like all the plastic surgery, the makeup for the plastic surgeries. That still looks really good. And yeah, a lot of the explosions, like practical effects, still hold. I agree though. A lot of the CGI looks very cheesy. Although that didn't stop me from enjoying the surfing scene.
Yeah,
actually, like more can add to that.
There is a charm to some of it, even though, I mean, again, I'm sorry, it just looked bad to me. But I think there were times where there was like the surfing scene. It looked bad, and yet for some reason I found it amusing. Yeah. Like it worked at that moment. It did not help me to take the film all that seriously at all.
Right.
But it gave it a weird sort of element that I think was fine, and it for what it was fun enough.
Or can we just agree that when not counting something like Point Break, which was sort of like the whole thing is kind of surfing oriented, but can we just agree that when your action hero gets to the point of surfing, that it immediately indicates a problem? Like I'm thinking of this. I'm thinking of James Bond surfing in the beginning of Die Another Day, let alone surfing away from the glacier melting in the same film. Plus, like Batman and Robin sky surfing in Batman and Robin. John McClane surfed on a plane or whatever. It's like, can we just agree that surfing for your action franchise is just the kiss of death?
It's usually not a good idea.
Yeah. I don't know what it is, but it's just something about it that just doesn't work.
Okay, so
the makeup was amazing in this.
It was.
Talking about CGI,
yeah.
But the makeup was actually really well done.
Mm-hmm.
That's the point I wanted to make.
Yeah, I think the makeup was definitely really cool, especially in the little horror interlude that we had with Bruce Campbell and all that. I did like the genetic mutations that we saw in that room for some reason. I don't know why, but
yeah.
Let's talk about. I know we've talked about the music throughout the film and throughout some of the first film too. So, did anyone else have anything else to add to the film music?
Much more contemporary.
Excellent choice of end credits theme.
Yes, White Zombie.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. That was definitely a cool ass moment at the end of the film. Well done for that. So favorite scenes, everyone. Let's start with you, Dustin.
That's kind of a difficult. I'm not really sure what my favorite scene was.
Okay, I'll move on to.
I think I'll go with the final shootout.
Okay.
It was a good battle.
Okay. What about you, Forrest? What was your favorite moment out of
Easily the surfing scene. I don't care how cheesy it looks. That scene was the fun. That scene to me was the shit. I mean, that was a scene I remember from watching the trailers like as a kid.
I have to say that was also my favorite as well. But my second favorite was the part where he like landed his bike on the back of that fucking vehicle. That was fucking awesome too. And I don't care how bad it looks. I mean, to be honest, yeah, it is a little dated, but it's not too much outdated, and I've seen worse.
Yeah.
So, going over to you, Dane. What were some of your favorite scenes from this?
Well, again, for as many ridiculous moments as there were, overall, I think the good moments trump the bad moments, and again, I think this film, the highs that it achieves, I think are actually higher than the first one, but again, it has more low lows. In terms of highs, the ending I think is my favorite part of it, just because that was really ballsy, especially because the rest of it I think is trying to be kind of a more fun romp. But I thought that was really ballsy, closely followed by the scene right before Valeria Gallino gets killed. I thought that whole thing really kind of grounded it and kept it into focus and gave her a whole lot more character moments, good things to say and do than Adriana Barbeau ever got. And then, again, the plastic surgery scene is sort of partially ridiculous, but also partially freaky in a good way. But also extra special shout out to the actual black leather suit up scene. I think that was nice.
Another moment right out of Batman, minus the butt shot.
Yeah, which that's one of the things that Joel Schumacher did right in his Batman films, was that he did manage to make the suit up montages look pretty cool, minus some of the butt shots and the nipple shots and shit. But like in principle, I think that was definitely the right move. And it was just done well here because it's black leather. So,
Alrighty, going over to you, Brandon. What were some of your favorite scenes, if there were any?
I did like the scene with Bruce Campbell, as quick as it was. Of course, my favorite was the surfing scene. I just love the campy, fun nature of the scene. Kiss or Death or not, it just was plain freaking fun.
Alrighty, did we go with you, Jake, yet? Or
not yet. And I have to admit, that I will at least give a nod to the surfing scene, because even though it was ungodly cheesy and it made me groan, it is one of the parts I remember. But I will have to admit that I'm going to agree with Dane that the ending was pretty badass, and it was probably my favorite part.
Okay. That being said, is there anything else that anyone else wants to add to this film?
Yes. So just for wrapping it all up here, this is from the man himself. John Carpenter later reflected, quote, "Escape from LA is better than the first movie, 10 times better. It's got more to it. It's more mature. It's got a lot more to it. I think some people didn't like it because they felt it was a remake, not a sequel. I suppose it's the old question of whether you like Rio Bravo or El Dorado better. They're essentially the same movie. They both had their strengths and weaknesses. I don't know. You never know why a movie's going to make it or not. People didn't want to see Escape that time, but they didn't really want to see The Thing. You just wait. You've got to give me a little while. People will say, what was wrong with me? And then later on he said, it is a better movie. I didn't do what the first one did for some reason. Maybe it was too dark, too nihilistic. I don't know. They didn't dig it as much as the first one. It did okay, but it just wasn't a hit. Which, yeah, it did get mixed critical reviews, and it was definitely a bomb. But it does have its own following, and I do find that an interesting little thing to leave us on, the fact that the man himself thinks that it's better than the first one.
Alrighty.
Take that as you will.
So, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully you enjoyed our little romp through these two films on two different channels. So hopefully the world as it is does not go that far to the left or right, as it were.
We're trying like hell.
But stay tuned for more exciting stuff. Next week we have, what do we have in store for us, Brandon?
I made the comment that I made the comment on Twitter that things really aren't all that different from how they are in Escape from LA right now. Yeah. So I was really feeling it extra.
Coming at it from a slightly different angle, but you're right. Which actually, one more thing. This movie predicted about 2013 was the rampant homelessness problem in LA.
Yeah, all across the country.
And I don't know if this counts, but earlier, before we say goodbye to you folks, I did make the comment that to me, the president, it kind of reminds me of Trump and his daughter in this day and age.
Well, yeah. In a lot of ways.
More of an overt and sincere theocrat rather than a wannabe one, but still.
Yeah.
So, with that, though, of course, next week we're going to continue on, starting off with an anime that, though it takes place in the far future, also predicts that we have started to colonize Venus probably like 10 years ago, which is a slight bit behind. Then called Venus Wars. And of course, our main show is going to take place in another dystopian future with Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Stephen King written adaptation, Running Man, which also an amazing film. So we've got some fun stuff, and we even have some cool stuff coming up in February as we're reaching into our own personal areas to find out what is in store horror wise, because we're going to look at indie horror films or full-blown horror films that were created in our own areas, and we've got some wonderful ones there. We got New York, we've got Wisconsin, we got Virginia. Well, not so much Virginia for horror, but in
North Carolina,
in North Carolina. So we've got lots of fun places to look at in store. So hopefully that'll be great for the future.
Alrighty, and why don't you start us out into our outros?
Oh, Septum Sen of Septum Sen versus the World. We love our physical media. I am working my darndest. I got sick early on in the year, so I had not been able to do as much as I wanted to. But we had a wonderful crossover discussion about the best and worst of Inside Movies Galore for 2020. And we also are planning on I am planning on getting some more reviews done. I know I have Splatter Farm on the horizon, so it's going to be some fun times in the future. Check us out.
Alrighty, let's go over to you, Jake, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm Kodabiki Jake, and I guest on Septum Sam vs. World on a regular basis, and also play on this channel and Delusions of Grandeur. I am a movie fan and would-be reviewer, I suppose, and collector. And we can also look forward next month to my birthday selection. So look forward to those toward the ends of the month. And well, that's about it for me this week. Go on.
Alrighty, going over to you, Dane. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I am Dane Kyle, aka Dane Damarung on YouTube, and I am on the channel Indie Horror Film Creative, where I do a show called Blu-ray Views, unbox some Blu-rays and talk about them. I did a video just today about the 6 Clint Eastwood Kino Lorber Blu-rays that managed to come in the mail from eBay. Got a good deal on those, and yeah, trying to do that. Plus, this week, looking into, being able to get my first, podcast about film analysis, specifically themes in films. Gonna try to get that going because it's been something that's been on my mind for a while. I just needed to carve out some time with which to do it, and so no time like the present.
Alrighty, so let's go over to you, Dustin. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, I'm a student and horror collector living here in Milwaukee. I find stuff and put it on my YouTube channel, The Crypt of Horrors. I also have an Instagram, The Crypt of Horrors. And I'm working on having a Twitch account now, Duracryptaxis, DER Cryptaxis, which is also my Twitter handle, where you can find me just kind of hanging out. So, yeah, give me a follow everywhere.
Definitely. And
So
Forrest?
new videos coming somewhat soon.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. So Forrest, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
All right. My name's Forrest Bennett. I'm based on Long Island, New York. Avid movie goer and comic book fan. Also comic book reader. Also independent producer. Also independent film producer of indie horror films. Camp Crystal Lake survivor. And this weekend I will be performing in a table read of Super Mario Brothers the movie on Facebook Live, where I'll be playing the role of Luigi. So you can look forward to that. So if any of you have Facebook, you can look forward to that this weekend.
Alrighty. Cool. And my name is David Streggy. I am one of the founding fathers of Inside Movies Galore, where we have decided to go on an adventure through film, which has been several years in the making now, because we are now fully fledged on iTunes. We are on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Pocket Casts, and several others to be named specifically. Working on getting ourselves onto Podbean and Stitcher, but that is to be continued. So follow us on some of these other avenues, some very cool mixes and some interesting commentary from other folks involved in film in between, and some ad libs from us. So stay tuned for more exciting stuff that'll be uploaded every week as we continue our journey. I also moonlight under a different channel called Delusions of Grandeur, where I go on about the videos that I pick up, video reviews of my own, and hopefully to aspire to talk about more films for you. So hopefully y'all have had some pretty good times, and we'll have some more cool films to share with you. So at least from our experiences. from here and afar. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and good night, all.
Good night.
All right.
Night.
Night.
All right.